In George's story is the story of someone discovering the power of purpose. George, from what I understand when I was speaking to you earlier, you discovered the beauty and the power of words when you were 15. From that early beginning, you moved and transferred and transformed into what you are today. The Telegraph, British newspaper, described you as England's most influential poet. George, you may not know, he opened a wedding last summer of a certain Prince Harry and Meghan Markle with an audience of 1.6 billion. Billion! Not even million, billion. And a couple of months ago, his amazing podcast won 5 Golden Awards, including the best podcast. So that's very impressive, very impressive. But it is not the most impressive thing about you, George. The thing that impresses me about you most is your sense of purpose. You see, George, as he mentioned, he grew up in a estate in inner city London. And what he chose to do is take the experiences, often difficult experiences, and combine that with his ability to fuse words and music and education to have real social impact. Whether that's for underprivileged children in London, whether it's tackling hate crime, whether it's migrant rights, whether it's health and well-being for young kids in Botswana and Lesotho who are suffering the effects of HIV/AIDS. So that's what's inspiring, George, is that you've taken what you have and you're using it to do good in the world. And that's, I think, the most inspiring part of your story. So if I could ask you once again to show your appreciation to George. So in essence, purpose is really just about taking your gift, whatever that might be, your experience and your story, and turning it into a legacy, as you suggested, George. You know, what difference can we make in the world with the things that we've got? And what's unique about this audience is that you all come with a deep sense of meaning. In some cases, you have a general sense of wanting to make the world better. In other cases, you're very, very specific and tangible about what you're doing, tackling gender-based violence in the workplace, perhaps improving the rights of workers, perhaps it's about tackling the climate crisis. But you all have something that drives you, and that's quite unique in an audience like this. And when you go around meeting people, I think there's more than 300 of you here today, you'll hear lots of stories, a bit like George's, where people have taken what they've developed over their life, their experiences, and turned that into something very, very tangible. So that's a very special opportunity, and I encourage you to share your own stories when you meet others today. Now, when you translate that into business, when you translate that even at the individual level within business, the thing about purpose is it allows us to become the brightest version of ourselves. It allows us and it pulls us forward to do things we could never imagine and to imagine things that other people could even think about. And for businesses, it means completely reimagining perhaps what business is about and what it does. For me, purpose is not CSR. Purpose does not need to be confined to the sustainability department. It is this all-pervasive force that can drive and inspire and align business and how businesses operate, what they do. The thing about purpose is actually it's perhaps one of the most important drivers for innovation. It's one of the most important ways for us to really think about and question this connectedness between long-term commercial value and impacts for people and planet. It allows us to think fundamentally and deeply about what we're doing and why. Now, that's not an easy journey, as I'm sure many of you know. In fact, it's a very hard journey. And today you'll have the opportunity to meet other people who are on that journey. Some of you are way ahead. Some of you are early on, and that's okay. Some of you have got it cracked. You work for organizations that are creating these cultures and systems that help you innovate and live that purpose, while others of you work for companies who are lucky to have you working for them to help them embed that purpose more meaningfully. And that's okay too. Today is a day for learning and sharing. We have a number of sessions where you'll get to hear about stories of success, stories of failing forward, stories of things that are working and things that we need to do better. It's also a chance for you to sit down with some personal coaches. We have 3 coaching sessions during the day to really understand and develop that personal resilience that you will need. So make the most of that opportunity to share. Now, the thing about purpose is that it's very personal in a sense. It comes through your own story, and ultimately you are the person responsible for implementing that purpose. And for me, that sense of purpose is evolved over the last, over my life, but especially over the last few years. I've become much clearer about what that means for me. And I think for me, if I boil it down, it's about creating belonging. And by that I mean helping deepen connections and relationships. Because I feel that that is ultimately the thing that will change the world, is helping change makers like you connect and helping you do more of what you do. So my purpose is to create belonging. But the origin of that actually, for me personally, came from a deep sense of not belonging. There's a great book actually by Afua Hirsch called British, where the ish is in brackets. She, if you don't know her, her mother, on the mother's side, Ghanaian, on the father's side, were Jews who escaped Nazi Germany. But she talks about this tension and that very simple question of where are you from? And I get that asked quite a lot myself. And it's actually a very difficult question to answer. And for me, as an Anglo-Irish, German, Pakistani, Bangladeshi Brit who lives in Spain in this era of Brexit, it's something that really has been quite a key part of my identity, or rather, lack of. And that sense of not belonging has been quite an important drive for now me wanting to create more belonging. But actually, there have been really important moments in my life that have helped me turn that into fuel for my purpose. And some of you would have heard me talk about my grandmother before, about a really influential woman in my life who, at the age of 20, fell in love with, and despite being disowned by her own parents and her best friends, married an Indian boy while the family were living in Burma at the time. And her bravery and the love that she had for this man really has shone a beam of light across the generations that show and demonstrates the power of connection. And I take inspiration from her story. And you'll all have stories that are sort of equivalent to that. And there's something, someone, some moment that has led you to the point that you are at today. So purpose is this hugely powerful thing. It can make us much better, and it can make us think bigger. But it's also powerful in the sense that it can get us through our darkest moments. There's an amazing book, which if you haven't read, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, which, if you don't know Viktor Frankl, he was a very famous neurologist and psychiatrist who spent 3 years in Auschwitz and various concentration camps during the Second World War. And he was fascinated by, not so much by why people didn't survive, but why did some people survive. And it grew on a theory that he had developed at the time anyway, but it built out on that. And essentially, his view was that if you understand and you look at how people can survive these really difficult situations, it comes down to one thing, that is a sense of a meaning in one's life. And that meaning can carry you through even those difficult circumstances. And he boils it down to 3 main things. He talks about meaning that derives from work, so doing something you're passionate about, working towards a cause that you care about. He also talks about love, so people you care about, things you care about, nature. he also talks about suffering. And actually, in suffering and getting through things that are unavoidable, that focus you get and that strength you get is also a source of meaning. And I'm sure many of you here today would either have got through something difficult in implementing your purpose or are going through something difficult to implement your purpose. And please, again, share that story, because we also need to learn about that as well. For me personally, my darkest moment came actually about a year ago, just before this conference last year. We were very busy, obviously getting ready for this event. I think we had something like 6 or 7 big projects running, but we ran out of cash. And I remember the moment at about 3 a.m. sitting in my office, and I just stopped and I thought, that's it, it's over. And that moment of the abyss, which I'm sure some of you have seen, was quite a sort of, I guess, an abrupt awakening for me, thinking this is the end of everything that I've worked for, and I've let myself down, my family down, my purpose down. And that was quite a difficult moment. Ironically, we were also the lead supporter of a book by Gib Bullock called The Entrepreneur, which I highly recommend, which looks at the mental pressures of driving social impact. And I think, for me personally, that side of our industry or our community is something that we haven't thought about enough and we don't do enough about. Oh, as a society, actually, we don't do enough about. And so it made me think, what can we do more as a community to help each other? As individuals, how can we be more vulnerable and ask for help when we need it? And I think there's so much more that we need to explore in that space. For me personally, Gib was hugely helpful at the moment. Many of you here in the audience, my wife Yvette and my family. And the good news, we got through it. And in fact, it forced us to innovate. And within about 6 months, we actually doubled the business. So it was a happy ending to that point. And I feel so. But it was actually ultimately my sense of purpose that got me through that moment. And I think that's the power of purpose. It gets you through the hard times as well as the good times. So I think, today, use the opportunity to share your personal journey, to learn from others, and to collaborate. And at Business Fights Poverty, we're passionate about what we call purposeful collaboration. That's collaborating essentially with a number of things very, very clear. Why you're collaborating, who you're collaborating with, what you're collaborating on, when you're going to do it by, how you're going to do it in terms of how you can do it authentically and co-creatively. And we try and take that philosophy into how we mobilize and work with lots of people. And I'm delighted to say we have a number of what we call challenges running at the moment, including around embedding purpose into business, around creating micro, small, and medium enterprise ecosystems and strengthening those, tackling gender-based violence in the workplace, working with business to drive gender equality across value chains by engaging men as allies. We're looking at forced labour and how you can use technology to tackle that. We have a new challenge launching in the future of work. We're looking at potentially the social aspects of tackling plastics pollution. So there's a whole range of ideas and challenges that we want to work on. And if you have other ideas, then obviously, please let us know. But essentially, this whole journey of purpose, it's one of these things that is never over. You never get to the point of saying, I've done, I've met my purpose. It is a constant journey, a consistent journey. And as Viktor Frankl said, it's that tension between what you are and what you ought to be, all the time for us. And that is the thing that drives us. And that's actually what we all have in common. But on that note, one thing I'd like to end on is just a point that in this room are people that can really help you, if you're willing to ask for that help and willing to receive it. So on that note, I'd like for you to just take a moment and introduce yourself to the person to your left, to your right, in front and behind. If you could do that now, very quickly. We can go home now. That's the job done. So one thing I always find fascinating in these sorts of gatherings is if you do come as yourself and you open up, then it's very likely you're going to meet someone who's going to help you. And actually, it's very likely the person you just met, one of the people you just met, will be just the person you need to meet today. You have plenty of opportunities to meet other people, of course. And we look forward to collaborating today and into the future. I'm really excited to say that we actually are today announcing a new collaboration that we're exploring with WWF around their Nature Pays hub, which is really looking at how you can connect community enterprises to markets to improve livelihoods and also land conservation. So, if you're looking for new collaborations, there'll be people in this room that will be, I think, very happy to speak to you. On that note, I'd like to hand over to my co-founder and also wife, Yvette. Thank you.